First job this morning, move all the bonsai trees out of the sunshine. Too heavy. Now luckily I haven't got hundreds of trees. I can imagine there's some people that have got a whole garden full that haven't even got any shade to move them to. I'm lucky to have this corner here that doesn't get any sun. So I've got somewhere out of the sun to put them, give them a good water, and probably water them again later in the day, and soak the plants and the concrete, keep the humidity there, stop them drying out overnight. Right, clarification. I'm not very good at being concise, but I think I need to be. So this video follows on from yesterday's Sunday chat, and the subject matter was the fact that first point of order is the video that I said that you ought to go and watch and, you know, take on board to one extent or another, including none, you can just ignore it, was basically talking about species growing in trees or on trees in the wild. Yeah? Now that differentiates the subject from some other orchids. You may have a vigorous hybrid, one like that, that's pushing up 7 or 8 new growths with bloom spikes on all of them. Would that subject matter apply to that orchid? I'd probably say no. So we need to go careful applying the logic, yeah? As I said, it was directed mainly at species growing on trees in the wild, basically getting next to no feed. You will have heard that many times in my videos over the years. Well, what would they get in the wild? Well, they wouldn't get that in the wild, you know. They wouldn't get a special bloom booster in the wild for that orchid on that branch, whereas the rest of the tree just got ordinary rain. These things don't happen. They get what they're given, and what they're given is very, very little. But what the guy was getting at was the analysis of that very little contained very little potassium. As a percentage, you know, this is the amount parts per million in that rainwater, and within that the balance was not as expected. The potassium was low, and yet the orchid still grew, bearing in mind the potassium is a major aid and abettor. That's the way I'll put it. It makes things work in the plant. It helps everything go about its business, so to speak. In simplistic terms, there's a whole lot of science behind that lot, which I don't even fully understand because I don't need to. So that's what he was getting at. For the plant to work, there must be something else going on. And he reckoned that, you know, orchids, having had rather a long time around on this planet to get their act together, have found ways of getting round that low element of potassium, which they need. They need that functionality. So that's what it was all about in simplistic terms. But it's based on very, very low levels of feed with an even lower element of potassium for species growing on trees in the wild. Now, put that to one side and stop and think, what are you growing? If you're growing store-bought Phalaenopsis on your kitchen window, all that lot doesn't apply, does it? Think about it. A build-up of potassium in the storage organs of the orchid, the storage areas. Well, what storage areas are there in Phalaenopsis? None. They're different. They don't come into the same category. And they're hybrids. They've been hybridized over the years to be different from the species. They're more temperature tolerant. They're tolerant of lower humidity. They're tolerant of loads of different light levels, and they'll still do okay. And they need to be fed. So don't start running away from feeding, you know, all of your orchids when some orchids are just not going to do well with this very low level of food. The guy was talking about species that grow on trees. So don't, for goodness sake, apply that to your cymbidiums that are in the main terrestrials. They grow on the ground. And so Hurricane Hector's just kicked in. I was going to say up my trouser leg, but I haven't got them on yet. I'm still in my dressing gown. It's still early. You know, get your jobs done early in the day before it gets too hot. It's only 20, 21 degrees in here at the moment. It's comfy. It's the same outside. It's even less than that outside. It's about 19, 20. Early in the day, get your stuff done. And then you can flake out with a beer or whatever. Anyway, so, you know, you have to apply a little bit more logic than just taking that as read. And it's like I said, you know, it's most cymbidiums, not all, some are actually epiphytes, but a lot of them are terrestrials. And if they're terrestrials, the guy did analyse, you've got the rain coming down out the sky, the rain halfway down the tree, and the runoff at the bottom of the tree. And those were different. And once you get down into the soil, or the leaf litter, or whatever's on the ground, you've got a whole different ball game going on. That's where most of the decay is, isn't it? You know, okay, some of the leaves hang up in forks in the tree and get hooked up on plants and stuff, but a lot of the dead material off of a tree ends up on the ground where it decays. So the makeup of what's in the soil is totally different to what's running down the tree. So you have to apply a bit more logic than just taking that subject as read. It's a bit more than that. So I may have to do this. I'm still thinking on it, and I need to go and watch that video yet again, maybe even twice. I've got all day. But believe it or not, I've actually got to go out today. I have no choice. The stuff that I use for the cat litter in the tray, I've run out. So I've got to go and get some. So I'm going to have to go out in a flipping car. Now, they open at 9, so I shall be on my way shortly. And then I can get tucked away in the shade indoors before this heat builds up too much. Yeah, so you just got to apply it with a pinch of salt. And I'm thinking that, you know, I've got my sets of orchids. I've got my cooler, shadier set. I've got my holy clay pot set. I've got my other types of pots set. And I've got my mounted set. Well, I think we may be thinking about splitting the orchids up into different sets. Sets that need next to no food, sets that need some more because they're actively growing, and sets that are generally vigorous, and unless they're just doing nothing at any particular point in time, they need some feed. Because otherwise I can't do it. I can't go round not feeding lots of plants or giving them very, very little food in a run. You know, like in that video on Sunday, the Sunday chat, I watered everything with water. Yeah? That's because I wanted to water everything. Some plants that got water could have done with some food. Yeah? But I can't do lots of different types of feed. Low level, medium level, flush, in the same go. Unless I've got the orchids separated via that mentality, rather than the way I do it now. And then there's light, you know. Well, luckily in here, the light level's relatively even, you know. I mean, okay, sort of lower shelves are shaded by plants above, but the light's not, most of the light's not coming in from above in this place, it's coming in from the sides. And because it comes in from all sides and from above, it's even. So there are no heavy shaded areas here. I haven't got any. If I had a plant that needed heavy shade, I'd be struggling. That's about as shady as it gets, that shelf down there on the floor. And that's because it's got these either side of it and those above it. So that's about as shady as it gets, and that's still quite good light. That's better light than you would get in a house, you know. So it's like my Restrepias, they're shaded from above and by this rack, and yet we've got some purpling on the leaves, yeah, and that's where they changed. I think that's where they moved house. And they've gone from what was quite heavy shade to what isn't anywhere near as heavy shade. Anyway, digressing. Like I said, I have trouble being concise. But just bear in mind, the subject of the Sunday chat was based on species growing on trees. Yeah? Very low levels of feed available to them, and even lower percentage-wise of the potassium. And the discovery that if plants, orchids, because they've adapted to, get round not having much potassium under those circumstances, if you give them too much, it will start to build up in the plant because they will take it in, as opposed to the other elements which they take in what they want. Because they're used to not having much potassium, they become a grabber. And they grab every bit of it that they can get their hands on through the roots, yeah, and possibly through the leaves, I don't know that, yeah. And as a consequence, if you feed higher levels of potassium, they will grab it. They might ignore the other stuff because they've got enough at the moment, but they'll grab it, and that's when it starts to build up. And if there's a build up in the plant, it messes up some of the other stuff. So that was the point that was being got at. If the plant can get round the problem with the potassium to a degree, when it gets some potassium, it would be a bonus if it can use it all. Therein lies the low level of feed. If it can use it all, there won't be a build-up. So that's where you're trying to find the balance there. If you can't get a fertilizer that's got a low K value compared with all the others, then you've got to use what you've got. I mean, I've got MSU formula. Well, I'm going to carry on using it. I'm not going to not use it. I'm just going to make it work better for me, I believe. Now, somebody made a very valid comment. That came from the Michigan State University, researched and verified by many growers over the period of time it's been available as flipping good stuff. So why should we be messing with it? Well, just bear in mind, most of the research that was done on Paphiopedilums and Phalaenopsis in the main. How much storage have those two types of plants got? Yeah? So the research was done on plants that, basically don't have storage organs. There was logic there, don't get me wrong. That wasn't a daft idea, that was a good idea, because it meant that everything that was fed went directly into the plant and could be analysed. It wasn't getting stored and its makeup changed, possibly. So it could be easily analysed at tissue level and all that sort of stuff. So it's good stuff. And yeah, but not all orchids are the same. We know some feed heavier than others. Some need hardly any food at all. So there is no one formula that works for all. But that was probably the best general formula that's ever come about. And it works for everything. But it will work better for some things than others, because not all orchids are the same. So just bear that in mind. Anyway, so just to clarify, the subject matter in the video I recommended you go and watch was based around species growing on trees. Yeah? Not vigorous hybrids. Not terrestrials. You see what I'm getting at? So you have to apply a little bit of logic here. I'm a little worried that everybody's going to run away and stop feeding all their orchids. And you've got your nice Cattleya that's got 4 fantastic new growths this year that are pushing on nice and hard. It probably isn't a good idea to stop feeding that, is it? It's the same with my Miltonias over there, pushing up new growths, trying to form new bulbs and push out spikes, form buds and open the blooms. It's going to need some food. And okay, you could say, well, surely it will just do all that from its reserves. Yeah, they're not species, they're hybrids. They've had some vigour bred into them, and so they grow harder than perhaps the basic species. And You know, it's like you take the store-bought Phalaenopsis again. They've been hybridized and hybridized to change their makeup, change the way they work, so that we can grow them in the home on the windowsill and they'll still work okay. You try that with some of the Phalaenopsis species and they're not going to make it. They're different plants. So bear that in mind, please. Don't all throw your fertiliser in the bin. You could say if it's not broke, don't fix it. But you have to bear in mind that this build-up of the potassium and the potential for it to stop other elements working is not an overnight process. This is something that happens over quite a long period of time. And like I've said, it may explain why plants that seem to do okay for a while very slowly go downhill, and you can't work out why because you haven't changed anything. That's what I was getting at. It may have explained some of my deaths. You know, you sort of think, well, that plant was next to that plant, they're both getting treated the same, and then you come back to this, well, not all orchids are the same. This one may be able to utilise a bit more food than the one next to it. Maybe its canes are growing, you know, I mean, if you take like this one, this is not growing at all. It's doing nothing. That doesn't want any food until the new growth start. And there it is. There's the new growth. That's flipping long last. That cane could grow from the reserves in these two canes, but the whole plant would be weakened in this case. Now, this is a species. This would be one of those growing in the trees. But to aid and abet the formation of that cane and the new roots that will go with it, bearing in mind it's not growing in its perfect conditions, it'll get some help. And that's right next to this one. Look at the canes on this. Big, vigorous, chunky, substantial. But this plant's not growing. These canes have finished growing. It's not growing. Doesn't need any food at the moment. My bulbophyllum over here. The new growths are maturing. There's some more new growths coming. So it's actually doing something. It's growing a bit. So that wants a bit of food. Yeah. Then you get Tolumnias. They've got no storage. They've got no storage organs. They take their food as they get it and use it. That's it. What feed do they get? They grow on twigs. They've got probably the least amount of decay that they can get access to of all the orchids. They grow on twigs. There is no dead stuff lying around. They're not growing in moss. They're on twigs. How much food do they get? You see what I'm getting at? They're not the same. They're not all the same. Oh dear. Right. I'm hoping that's clarified things, and it may have made them worse. Is an example over here. This Latoria type. Basic plant. Look at this. And there's two of them. Look at the size of those new canes. And they're pushing roots out. That's in what you would call serious active growth, that plant. Now, is it a hybrid? I believe it is. Aussie sweetness crossed with a species. Yeah, so it's a hybrid crossed with a species. So there may well be some hybrid vigour in there. But if that had no food, to produce those two canes and the root system that goes with it would probably have drained the whole plant. So it's got to have some food. Now, we still got this business of, is it getting too much potassium? But it certainly needs some food to grow canes like that. Yeah? So you shall see. Anyway, I'm going to make some adjustments. And I've only got half a growing season left now, mid-July. But for the rest of this growing season, I'm going to try. I'm not doing it today or tomorrow, it's going to be too hot. But when we get some more sensible weather, it's the sort of thing I'd like to do on a rainy day when there's nothing else to do. I may well try sorting these plants out into two distinct sets. I can do it by shelf. So one set is a set that will rarely get food. It'll get it in very small quantities and not too frequently. Well, it'll go with the watering, basically. I'm still convinced that a flush now and again is a good idea. Because we grow artificially, you know. If you think that what we've just been talking about, the plants growing on the trees, what's the difference between them and this? This is dead. If it's growing on a tree, it's growing on live bark. The bark's not decaying, it's not breaking down. So even mounted orchids can suffer from their mount breaking down. I mean, I've lost a couple of orchids where the mount was breaking down and going rotten behind the moss and I couldn't see it. I just wondered why they suddenly went downhill. So, you know, many reasons orchids can go downhill, not just one. Anyway, I may try and actually establish distinct sets that get virtually no food, like the Masdevallias, Restrepias, Dracula, singular, Tolumnias. You know, they very, I mean, I've got a guy I know who grows, you know, I mean, look, even this one's starting to get the green bits now, the yellow bits. It's probably food, it's too much, but it is blooming nicely. We shall see, but a guy that grows hundreds and hundreds of Masdevallias and Draculas as well. If you ask him how he feeds his orchids, he gets a puzzled look on his face and he says, "Feed? I don't feed mine. I can't remember the last time I fed my Masdevallias." And yet they're all doing really well. What about that then? That's a mealybug. Well, blow me. I don't get them. Well, obviously I got one. But, you know, it's not something I get. It's just sat behind that bud. That Masdevallia, I just saw a bit of white there. There's only the one. Where that came from. Well, the thing is, the door and the window do get open. The door gets open frequently now. That door was open for half an hour this morning, along with this door here behind me and the window on the far side of the lounge. And I got a nice cool airflow through. So the lounge is now cooler than it was first thing. Anyway, just hopefully take all that from the Sunday chat and apply it. Don't apply it to every orchid you've got, because it doesn't apply to every orchid you've got. And it may not apply to any of the orchids you've got. So go steady how you use the information. Don't just, you know, take it as read that needs to be done to all your orchids and you throw your fertilizer away. And just go steady with how you use the information. And yeah, as I said, I may well, you know, get myself a set of orchids that get such a tiny amount of food each time they get watered, with a flush now and again, and then another set that get a slightly stronger amount of food, you know. And when we get up to those that are capable of storing feed, you know, have storage organs, which is most of what I've got, quite honestly, you know, just eased back on the potassium. And I can't ease back on it, so what I can do is increase the other bits, which makes it as though it's got less. But overall, it will get less because the overall feed level is going to come down. So, and we'll give it a go. They say orchids thrive on neglect. Well, perhaps we've found out why. You mollycoddle them and keep giving them lots of food, let's feed it. Yeah, maybe you're doing more harm than good, maybe. So, and yet some orchids are not going to do that well without those higher levels of feed. I mean, Vandas like a good feed, you know. I doubt if they would grow as well without it. But again, no storage organs. Cymbidiums, classed as quite high feeders. Phalaenopsis, we're finding a pattern here. Terrestrials and those without storage organs. Catasetums. I mean, I don't grow those, but apparently when they come into growth, You know, they feed quite high, they utilise the feed they're given. But I wonder how many people have decided that because that's what you read and that's what people tell you, you just do it. I wonder how many people that grow that sort of plant have actually said, well, I'm not going to bother feeding mine and see what happens. So that it's based on, you know, experience rather than what bloke says. You know, well, how do you know that? Well, bloke at the pub said. Well, it must be true then. Anyway, I've waffled on enough. I didn't want this a long one, and hey, it is. So your hippie soap video will now be tomorrow. But looking at the comments, some people are obviously slightly misinterpreting the point that was being made on Sunday. As I said, that often happens with me because I waffle around the subject a lot instead of doing concise bullet points. Perhaps sometimes I should. See you next time. Thanks for dropping by.